Hi friends, this is your pal Scott Garibay, and today we are going to talk about um, Dungeons and Dragons, and we are specifically going to talk about the question: Is Heroes on the Borderlands starter set a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons? And I believe it is, and I want to present some evidence today on that, or I want to tell you why I believe it is. So first of all, Scott, it's not labeled as a new edition. That's correct. And I already did a video explaining why Hasbro would be incented to not label it as a new edition, even if it is. And you're like, well, wait a second. They have labeled many things as editions. So why is it just this one weird product where it's a new edition according to you, but they're not saying it's a new edition? First of all, I don't think that this is the first time this has happened. I think it's happened before, and that is the Young Adventurers Guide. These are a series. I think it's up to about 15, close to 20 books now. They sell them for like junior high age kids. And I believe, and in the back of that book, it literally tells you how, in the back of those books, there's directions on how to run Dungeons and Dragons in a way that doesn't match anything in any other edition. So I believe the Young Adventurer's Guide is another stealth edition. So I do believe this is a new edition, but I believe it's a stealth edition. It's an edition of Dungeons and Dragons that is distinct, is a different edition, and is not labeled as an edition, which is very unusual. All right, so Scott, why are you saying this is a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons? It's just the lower levels of Dungeons and Dragons run with a bunch of cards and tokens, right? It's not quite correct. I think there are at least 3 major changes to the Dungeons and Dragon rules in Heroes on the Borderland that establish it literally as a new edition. All right, so let's talk about that. What are they? So first and foremost, it is the hero boards. The hero boards don't exist anywhere else, right? And you're like, well, Scott, that's just, it's just a character sheet in a different mode. That's not correct, in my humble opinion. So first of all, the hero boards do change the rules significantly, in my humble opinion. So what's the first change? Well, the first change is when you go to see your strength score, right? If you're a fighter, it says +2, right? And you're like, okay, so that means you have a 14. No. At no point anywhere does it ever say you have a 14 strength, right? This is a big deal. Why? Why doesn't it say you have a 14 strength? Well, here's why. Every other edition of Dungeons and Dragons, you go to make your strength, you go to swing your sword, and the dungeon master says, add your strength bonus, right? Every other edition of Dungeons and Dragons, the player says, oh, I'm going to add a 14. I bet I'm going to hit. No, you're going to add a +2. Wait, why do I have 2 numbers with my strength? The +2 is what you add to your roll. And what's the 14? What does it serve? Nothing. Wait, no. It does do something. It confuses me every single time I need to make a strength check. I'm confused. Do I add the number 14 that does nothing, or do I add the number 2, right? And this new edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and I believe this is, and I'm going to call this, in my humble opinion, the correct name for this is the Hero Board D&D Edition. It is the Hero Board D&D Edition. The Hero Board D&D Edition says, in this edition, you will never be confused when you go to swing your sword, ever. You add a 2. Not 4, not 10, not 14, 2, right? Not a 4, And that number has been kept edition after edition after edition. And every time we bring it through another edition, you're like, well, is the 14 used for anything? Like, what is the purpose of it? There's absolutely no purpose. It doesn't do a single thing except serve to confuse people. That's a big deal. Okay. The next one is there things in the Heroes of the Borderland that are not in the regular edition, a 5th edition. Yes. Here's another one: power tokens. there are these power tokens, and they go into slots on cards. There is absolutely no analogy of this in any other edition of Dungeons & Dragons. It doesn't appear anywhere, right? And so that is completely new. The other thing is you don't write anything, right? Like you handle your character without writing, right? There are tokens for gold, there are tokens for hit points, there are these power tokens, and your equipment is handled with cards. You don't need to write anything. This is a writingless system. That's a huge change. And I think those three things alone, okay, and there are actually more, but those three changes alone are more than enough to establish this as a new edition, in my humble opinion. Every single word you just heard in this video is my humble opinion. Nothing more, nothing less. The important thing is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.